For your talk and presentation, what's the format that you prefer? Do you want us to ask the questions as you're going through, or do you want us to save the questions for the end? What's your preference?
I have put some slides together, but just as a guide, I
Hmm.
would really like if this is going to be a discussion, not a monologue. I don't want to give any talk to anybody, and
Yeah,
I just gathered some thoughts, and I would really love if you interrupt me and ask questions. That would be great.
awesome. Thank you. Well, just ready whenever you are, unless you guys have some questions about or two for Francesco.
So I'm going to share my presentation. See me if you can see it.
Yep, it's on display.
That is great. Okay, so today we are going to talk about stouts and porters because the history of stout and porters is really interconnected, so it's difficult to tell them apart. And I would like to get through a bit of porter and beer history in London from the beginning, and then try to delve into the difference between stout and porter and when this difference came really into life. And this I already told you. So I organized this presentation in four parts. The first part is about history, so the evolution of porter and the emergence of stout as a supposedly different style, but we'll delve into that in later. And then I'll try. I don't have a definite answer about the great stout versus porter debate, and but we try to discuss which is your opinion, and I have my opinion. Uh, and it's not the best one, I think, but it's something that I developed during the years of judging and reading history. And I really like the Martin Corner books, and I don't read all of the books because they are really tough, but there are a lot of information in these books, and so I gathered some information, and I have developed my opinion, and I want to share with you and see if you agree or don't. It's okay. And then I'd like to give you some insights on about how I brew stouts and how there is this kind of form conundrum, I call it, because this kind of really fluffy form on the Irish stouts, which is one of the main things in the BJCP, also the fluffy body and the nitrogen pour. And it's I think that it's something that we have to discuss because Irish stouts, they are not all like the Guinness, and so this is kind of, I mean, it's a benchmark, but it's not the only one. And then in the last part of the talk, I'm going to share some advice that I have about brewing stouts, and I would love to hear your opinions on that and your experience on brewing stouts. So let's start with the evolution of porter and the emergence of stout. Before we dive into porter and stouts, I like to do a quick recap on, how the main beer styles evolved in the UK. It's, porters are a big part of that story, and you're going to see that stouts interlace with porter history, and it's really not that easy to tell them apart. And we are going to think about that later and to delve into that distinction later. But for now, I like to get through the histories of styles because from that chronology we can gather some information about how the styles evolved and how the stouts actually evolved from porter. I mean, there are a lot of information in the Martin Cornell books, which are a gold mine, for knowing about styles. And what I do, I usually try to simplify the things and put it together in kind of an infographic. And I always bring this infographic with me because it really helps me to focalize and to focus on different styles and on how they evolved through history. And I mean. We are focusing on London, of course, because London was the heartbeat of brewing history, and London was the place where the most significant shift in beer styles actually took place. So, I mean, take it, with a grain of salt, because I know that the transition from one style to the other isn't, nearly as black and white as you'll see on this slide. But because, real history is never that kind of precise or neat. So, but I believe that, highlighting the styles that dominated London's pubs during specific eras, the specific periods of time, really helps use us to see the bigger picture. So, um, as we see this shift between one style and the next one, they are closely related to the major historical events that are quite, easy to remember. And I like to put this kind of major events on this slide, and the Industrial Revolution, the railway from Barton to London, the World Wars, and something that was related to the evolving styles in London. At the beginning, we have, I think you know that, the gin craze, because, all thousands of people were migrating from the countryside to London, and the life, living in London was really harsh, because you have, London was overcrowded, and and people have a lot of problems, dealing with normal life and working in London. So they ended up drinking a lot of super high alcoholic drinks like gin, and and the government also kind of deregulated the distilling, making gin incredibly cheap. So at some moment, gin got cheaper than beer, and that was a big problem, because gin became a quick and affordable escape from the harsh reality of city life. And this triggered what we now call the gin craze. That was a period of extreme social chaos, and problem with health issues, people drinking too much, people getting drunk in the back of shops, and it was really a problem. So it wasn't just a drinking habit; it was kind of a crisis that transformed, changed London, and forced the government at certain point to introduce some kind of major alcohol laws to restore order, to avoid people getting too drunk and getting bad health problems. So by the early 800s, London drinking habits kind of shifted from the chaos of gin to a beer-dominated culture, and brewers were producing mostly, but not only, brown beers. And from these brown beers, where Porter, as you already know, got the hold of London in the 1800s. At the time, the brown beers that were in pubs weren't exactly that good, because brown malt was dried over direct fire, so it was really kind of harsh, and brown malt got this kind of smoky edge, and you got some beers that were light, made maybe from the final runs of the mesh, and other beers that were stronger but not aged. So they were kind of cloying in sweet, and they often get contaminated during service in the pubs. So the pub owners have to mix different beers to get, something that was drinkable and not that bad to sip and to drink. So these brown beers were often inconsistent and of poor quality. And brewers eventually realized that they needed to change these things, to optimize these recipes, to create something that was more reliable and, palatable, drinkable, and somewhat tasty, and not harsh to drink. The traditional lore, the legend, I think you know that, wants that, in 1722, Ralph Harwood just make porter out of the blue to replace this kind of mixture that they made in the pub. They were called three threads because they were a mix of three different beers. And this story is not true, because Martin Cornell, studied that and said that it was impossible that a single person changed the drinking style of London. But what really happened is that over time, brewers just tried to improve the brown beers that were served in pubs, because they were not that good. And one approach was to brew a beer from a single mash and just let it age longer in casks. And that's how porter evolved during time. The cask got bigger and bigger, and the beer, when it was aged in cask, it kind of mellowed out and was, rounder, and was more drinkable, and more less harsh to drink, because the smokiness of the brown malt just got away with time. And it was kind of not that cheap, because if you keep the beer in the brewery for a longer time, you have to put kind of a you have to price it with a higher price at the pub. But that was rewarding for the people, and so the people from London started to drink porter because it was kind of a better beer compared to brown porter, and that's where the name come from the porter of London that from the goods around London from the docks. And so the story, as the real story is that just brewers started storing beer until it was mature and selling it back to publicans as a stale beer at a higher price, and it was mellow and was more pleasant to drink. And so there was no need anymore to mix the beer in the pub. So Porter took over London for 150 years, and the recipe changed a lot during time. We're going to delve more about in that in a few minutes. And it was, I think, that was the style that lasted in London for the longer times. And Porter slowly took over the entire London beer market. He dominated for 150 years, and only to finally give way to pale ales around the mid 19th century. And it was mainly for the railway that connected Barton to London. In Barton, they had been brewing pale ales for a longer time, because even if brown malt was the more widespread malt in London in the 1700s, pale ale malt was already available at at the end of the 16th century, 17th century, sorry. Mm. But it was really expensive because the technology was expensive, so nobody was drinking really pale beers. Just the wealthy people were drinking pale beers. But in Barton, they were brewing kind of not really pale, but amber beers with a lot of hops, and they finally evolved into the IPAs that we know today. You know that the term IPA was invented by the it was invented later because IPA existed before. OP, pale beers, existed before they were exported to the Indian colonies. But they were drank by wealthy people because they were expensive. With the Barton to London railways, with the pale ale malt becoming cheaper, IPA took the market, took over the London market from the half of the 19th century. And so Barton beers flooded London, and there were a lot of different kinds of pale beers. IPA was the more widespread, but you also got kind of a bottled IPA with less alcohol, which was already called bitter ale in the second half of the 19th century, but wasn't that famous or widespread in London. And then we get to the First World War, and with the First World War, it came the economic crisis. People had no money, and breweries had to adapt by reducing alcohol content to get the beer cheaper. And for some reason, that isn't clear even to Martin Corner, because I couldn't find any clear answer to that. Tastes shifted back toward darker beers. So you get porter, then IPA, and then mild. And maybe because, perhaps because it was easier to make mild, flavorful, even with low alcohol. So they use darker malts. I don't know. Martin Corner doesn't know. But the fact is that during the interwar period, malts slowly took over the beer market alone and ended up in most pubs and becoming the most popular drink, the most popular style drunk in London. Pale ale obviously still existed, but they only held a small part of the market. So we have porter, IPA, and mild as the main styles that succeeded one another. And then after the Second World War ended, people were looking for something new, and mild was seen as the old man's beer, and they wanted something that was in Europe pale lagers had taken hold because from 1842 when Joseph Kroll brewed the first Czech beers, lagers took over Europe, but they hadn't get to the kingdom, and they hadn't arrived in the United Kingdom yet. So people, they wanted something that was similar, but that was not a lager. And so they went back to a style that existed before mild, as I said before. but that had never truly gone mainstream. So it was the beginning of the bitter era, and from after the Second World Wars, uh, bitters dominate the market, the scenes, and until the industrial lagers arrived and put kind of an end to good beer. And I always like to say that rest in peace beer, craft beer, and you had the period with the big six, the big consolidation of the breweries in UK, and then the big four, and then the camera came to the rescue and they tried to defend real ale versus keg beer, and they actually succeeded. They are not like that anymore, but this is maybe another story. Uh, but the bitter lasted until the lager took over the British market. You might have noticed that I didn't mention stout in this, progression of styles. I didn't forget. The point is that they never really existed in London as a separate style from porter. We can see, reading the Martin Conley books that there were some kind of stout porters, double stout porter, triple stout porter in the, at the end of the porter period during, in the beginning of the 19th century, but that wasn't really a different style from porter. It was actually a stronger porter usually, or something that was exported to the Caribbean or to the Indies, but it wasn't really a different style. So you can get the definition of stout from the Martin Corner books in this period. And then if you read we had some autumn stout, mixed stout, tropical stout in the beginning during uh, the 19 period, but they were not defined by the stout characteristics. They just were defined by the special ingredient. Oatmeal stout and mixed stout just were famous because they were an healthy option, and breweries were trying to sell beer as an healthy drink that it is not, it was not, and it is still not. But they were defined by the special ingredients. Oatmeal stout were defined by the oatmeal, supposedly an healthy ingredient. Mixed stout were defined by it, mainly lactose addiction, and tropical stout were just a porter brewing in the Caribbean, resembling the export porter that was sent over by the UK. So we can really find a definition of stout during this kind of evolution of styles in London. There were some beers known as stout, but they weren't that different from the porter, and we are going to delve more in that shortly. Porter itself wasn't not the same through the 150 years that the style was popular in London. And I like this quote from Martin Cornell because he says that when people ask him what old Porter tastes like, his answer was when, because Porter went through different periods that were connected to scientific discovery and to technological evolution, and the recipe really changed a lot through the years. We can briefly go to the different recipes of porter through the years. And there were four main periods. In the early 1700s, the porter was characterized by brown malt. As I told you, it was 100% brown malt, so poor efficiency, lightly smoked because the malt was dried through direct fire, and it was aged in cask, so smokiness was reduced by age, by aging the beer, and likely it was, surely it was breathed, so it got kind of a breath infection during aging. But actually, breath was good for the beer because the pellicle reduce oxidation, and the breath actually, if they don't touch the oxygen, they don't produce a great deal of acid or acidic acid, and actually they produce some interesting flavors and aromas like fruity aromas, red berries, and so aging the beer gets you a really better beer than the brown ales. and the ABV was kind of mid-high, 7, 8% ABV. They weren't the best beers, but they were, better than the brown ales that people used to drink before. In late 1700s, the saccharometer was invented, so they understood that using brown malt wasn't that efficient. Brown malt wasn't a great malt, and so meanwhile, the pale malt they got more cheaper, so they tried to use more pale malt and less brown malt. But the problem was that they couldn't get to the same color. So brewers started to use weird stuff, adding weird stuff to the beer, like molasses, licorice, burnt sugar. They sometimes kind of concentrated the wort until it got really dark and, added it to the beer to keep the beer dark. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But the fact is that in the late, 1700s, the 12 London Porter breweries had 80% of the market. So in some way, the Porter they were better beers than before, and they took over the market in London. And the main change in this period was that they used less brown malt, and they used bigger and bigger and bigger cask, and this led to the London beer flood at the beginning of the 19th century that killed I think 10, 12 people, and so they stopped to getting bigger and bigger casks. Also, technological evolution came in the early 1800s was the black malt, the invention by Wheeler. And the black malt increased efficiency because finally brewers could use a big portion of pale malt as we do today, and add a small portion, 10%, 5%, I don't know, of black malt to get the right color and the right roastiness in the beer. In this period, some new types of porter went to the market, were launched to the market, like Esport, Stout, Double Stout, but they weren't a different style of beer. And I try to uh, talk more about that in a minute. And they started to be exported to India, the West Indies, and the ABV was decreasing because they didn't need, as long a higher ABV to keep the beer because they were increasing the open rate and they were getting better at preventing contamination. We were close to the Pasteur discovery of yeast, so the brewers know more about fermentation and about how to not get the beer contaminated. I mean, they weren't likely the beer weren't that perfect, but they weren't that contaminated, and they didn't get too acidic because they knew more about the brewing process. And then we get to the end, to the late 800s, the downfall of porter. As I said before, the IPA they were the new thing at that time, and the taste has changed, and just porter went out of fashion. Hop decreased, and the beer was sold younger because they didn't get affected. The bread faded because of Pasteur and because of better knowledge about fermentation, and the ABV was lower and lower and lower. And after that, the porter disappeared from London. Some breweries still brew porters, but after the end of the 1800s, it kind of disappeared from London.
Yeah. Francesco, just if you wouldn't mind going back to the previous slide on this. So Colonel make a lot of historical stouts and porters, and just based on your description, kind of fits into that early 1800s column. That's my experience with their beers, and they are quite bitter for what we would perceive is appropriate for the styles today.
I think that we know that all people know that IPA were brewed with a lot of hops to get to survive the long trip to the Indies. But what it is actually true is that porter was like that before IPA, because brewers understood that if you add a lot of hops to the beer, they kind of keep the lactic acid bacteria out of the way, and so you get the bread that kind of with a pellicle protected the beer from oxidation, and with a lot of hopping, a lot of bitterness, you can age the beer without it getting really sour. because you know
Yeah, and I
the
guess from the Asian perspective, before bread fully takes hold, you still have about 3 months to age the beer somewhat, sell it before you get a really strong bread expression. And strains like Bread C are actually fairly mild. They're not as pronounced as some of the more funky strains. So then it's almost like it's working in your favor, but you don't detect it as much. That's what I would imagine.
Yeah, you are completely right. And another thing is that, while lactic acid can be kind of disturbing in some ways, in especially in dark beers because it clashes with the dark malts. I think that, bread, it depends on the strain, of course. I mean, not the strain, the species, I don't know. Uh, they really integrate really well with the dark malts aroma. And I drank a beer from Kenya was kind of Vat Porter. I can't remember the name. They make a lot of dark beers that I love, by the way. And it was breaded and with a lot of red fruit expression, and it wasn't acidic, and it wasn't so sour, but it had this kind of really strong bread aroma, which I really like in a dark beer. It kind of drives the beer versus the Flanders Red Ale, and which kind of you
Yeah.
can imagine as an aged porter, and I think this is a good thing, a good.
No, for sure. I've made a fair few dark beers which were breaded with, whatever culture I had on hand, and um, they always get mixed reaction because the combination of flavors is a little bit surprising, but I really like them.
Yeah, it's not usual for our times, and um, I really like the kind of brewery because they made a lot of different porters with historical recipes, and they're really different from each other. And I completely agree with you that some versions are really hoppy from what we know today, and they are cool. I think that the export ones are more hoppy than the other because the concept is that to export the beer at that time you have to put in the beer a lot of hops, and that was what they did before making the actually the IPA, because we a lot of people think that India Palates were the first beer that were exported to the Indies, but they were not. I mean, porter was exported before to the Indies, to the Caribbean, and they were really, really strongly hopped because the high hopping rate, prevented a lot of contamination. You don't prevent bread with hop, but bread are not that bad actually. I mean, they can turn the beer into a kind of complex mix of fruit aromas that is actually good. Mm. So this is we haven't talked about stouts yet. I mean, not really. And the question is the main you know question that we are trying to answer this night is you know uh, how stouts fit into the history of beer styles. When were they born? When did they become distinct from porters? And most importantly, what exactly makes them different from porters? So what I did, I bought this wonderful book from Martin Conner, was the last one, and it's really tough to read, and I haven't read it fully, but I have read the chapter about the stout evolution, and I went to look for answers in this Martin Conner's new book, Porter and Stout, and this is a adaptation of what I found in that chapter about stouts. I tried to gather some key passages that from the content book that covered the period from the 1600s to the 1900s, and here's what I found, and I think it's really interesting. And I'm walking you through this period of time, this stretch of time with some quotes from Martin Conner's book. The fifth one is that, close to the 1600s, stout was being applied as an adjective, as we told before, an adjective to strong beers. So it kind of identified the stronger beers. So stout, as you know, is it means strong, and so at the beginning, stout just meant strong porter, a strong beer. But actually, what is interesting is that it just meant simply strong. And for a couple of of years from the 1600s, a stout could be pale or dark. So we don't have really a distinction between a pale beer or a dark beer called stout. For example, Barclay Perkins, as Martin Corner says, was still making pale stout in 1806. So in 1806, you don't have a definition of stout different from porter. It was just a strong beer. And the recipe from Barclay Perkins, they have a pale stout in there, in their range of beers. And what Martin Connor said is that Buckley Perkins stouts, they had around the 1800s, they have identical grain bills to, to their TT porter. So they brew a stout and a porter, and the recipe, the grain bills were identical. They had some difference in bitterness and in opi rate, but actually the grain bits were identical. So you couldn't tell them apart. And so you don't at that time you didn't have a difference in recipes between stout and porter apart from the open rate, which was not always stronger in stouts. Sometimes was stronger in stouts, sometimes was stronger in porters. So we don't have a clear definition, a clear difference between porter and stout in London in the 1800s. After that, in 1831, Martin Cornell says that stout still meant top quality porter. So not necessarily a stronger one, but in some ways stout meant that there was a good porter, an aged porter, a better brewed porter, I don't know, you name it, but it wasn't a different recipe. In time, at a certain point in the south of England, he says that, for the beginning of the 19th century, stout and porter started to be seen as separate categories. So I thought that, okay, we are going somewhere. We are going to, understand why they were different. And this was the beginning of, the different paths that they would took in time. But he said that even you get some differences and some different recipe between porter stouts. The stouts themselves, they, at least among the London brewers, they seem to have varied widely. So you couldn't really tell that there was a different recipe for a stout. They had different recipe from porters, but they were different from each other. So you could not identify a stout style in that period. I mean, we are getting close to the arrival of the IPAs, and we still haven't any differentiation between stout and porter, and we don't have a different recipe from a porter. And if Martin Cornell didn't find anything, I think that it's difficult to say that there was something that we can find that can make a difference between the two recipes. And at the end, he says that there must have been quite a divergence in the tastes of different stouts. So you kind of got to a kind of a differentiation between porter and stout, but it's not possible to have a single, I mean, not a single recipe, but some trend on the grain bill, on the hops, and on the recipes of stouts. So while you have kind of a common, not recipe, but a common trend for porters during the years, different recipes, but a common trend that changed during the years, you can not find any real trend in stout brewing. And so that was surprising to me, because what I was looking for was something that can give us a different recipe, but I couldn't find it. And in the book of Martin Cornels, in this last one, but also in the one that is called Amber Golden Black, you couldn't really find any common trend between different stouts brewed at that time. So I couldn't find anything. But something was happening in Ireland, and so maybe I thought we can look to Ireland and to see if maybe there was something that defined the stout style there. And so I went through the history of stouts in Ireland. And what I found is that, at the beginning, the stout as well, it just meant simply strong beer. And there was a reference in the poem. In 1750, Ireland was still importing potters from the UK, so they were drinking mostly whiskey and gin, and they didn't have a dark style of beer themselves. So I couldn't find anything in this period of time. You know that in 1759, it's printed on every Guinness glass. Arthur Guinness bought the brewery that was brewing kind of ales, stable beers, not dark beers. And some years later, he was starting to brew porters in Ireland. But they were porters, and they were porters, similar to the porters of England. They were not brewing stouts. They were not calling them stouts, and there were nothing about stouts in Ireland either in these years. A few years later, another big stout brewery was founded. It was the Beamish and Crawford in Cork, in the south of Ireland, and it was famous because he produced its own barley, and he got a vertical integration. And now it's just, I think it's just it was sold to Heineken, and it's not more brewed in Cork. I think it's just a trademark. And but we have two big breweries in Ireland that were brewing porters, not stout. In the 1800s, in London, the first stout porters appeared, as I said before, but there was not. I mean, there were not any stout style in Ireland as well. So we couldn't find anything in Ireland that was different from what was happening in London. And in 1833, Guinness became the largest porter brewery of Ireland, still brewing porter, not stout. And so we can find anything about stouts in Ireland as well. Then the Great Famine hit, and it wasn't a great problem for Guinness because Guinness was in Dublin, and Dublin was not really famine affected. And Guinness happened, a lot of family got to the famine, so it wasn't a big problem for Guinness. And naturally, there was a rapid recovery after the famine, and another brewery was found. Another big breweries were founded in Ireland was Murphy's in Cork as well as Beamish. In 1856, Murphy's was founded in Cork. And so we have three dark beer breweries that were brewing porters in Ireland.
I've been to the archive in Cork and have looked through Murphy's archives. This gives you a chance for a beer. Their earliest porter that I found was 1857. That was 1066 gravity. They were brewing all malt porters when they established their own maltings in 1889. That was 1055. And also in 1889, they were brewing XX extra stout at 1078. And then you move into the 20th century, and they're brewing 4 beers: Porter, X, XX, and Triple X.
What's the date that they were brewing the extra stout?
1889.
Yeah, that's the thing, because in 1880 there was some change in Ireland, and the Free Tune Act kind of allowed the use of roasted barley and
No. This roasted barley stuff, got a big issue with that. Black malt, not roasted barley. Roasted barley is a much later phenomena, 20th century at least. So they were very much black malt, not roasted
what
barley.
What was that in 1880 it was
1889.
1889, okay. But in 1880, there was the Free Tune Act that allowed Irish brewers to use a malted barley for brewing. That was not allowed before.
the grist was pale malt, amber malt, and black malt.
You mean Murphy's or Guinness?
This is Murphy's.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I
And
was
they were
talking
only
about Guinness.
copying
Okay.
Guinness anyway. Anyway, I
Okay.
just thought I'd put my 5 cents worth in there,
No, that's
or
really
6 penny
interesting.
worth.
What I because people think that I mean, what I read is that with this free mesh tune act, Guinness started to use roasted barley instead of black malt, and a lot of people think that this is the difference between Irish stouts and porter, and I don't think that is the real difference. And because, as you said, and I totally agree with you, there were breweries in Ireland that were brewing stouts in this time in the late 1800s. At the end of the 19th century, that were brewing stouts, beers called stouts without roasted barley. So I don't think that
I
roasted
think
barley is the. Oh, Peter.
I looked in the. I have these Guinness guides from the 1930s, and in there's a 1920s and 30s. There's a transition where they talk about roasted malt, and then they talk about roasted barley. My suspicion is very
Yeah.
much. I've not seen a brewing log from Guinness because it's a bit secret squirrel.
Yeah.
But I think the whole roasted barley thing is a 20th century thing, not a 19th century thing. For what it's worth.
I don't know. It may be. What I read, also Martin Collins says that with the free mash tun act, they could use unmalted barley. It doesn't say roasted barley. It said unmalted barley because it wasn't allowed before. And he says that they started to use roasted barley to brew the dark beers. But I don't really think that this was the moment in which the recipes kind of diverged from porter and stouts. And I don't think that roasted barley is the main difference between porter and stouts. And I don't, we talk more about that later, but I don't think that you can differentiate porter and stout just from the ingredients, because roasted barley and black patent, uh, they are different, because one is a malted and the other one is malted, but they're heavily roasted. And I don't think this is the main difference in flavor between the styles. What I found is that
Yeah,
oh,
I agree that uh, porter and stout is a continuum. It's not an abrupt change. It's a continuum. Yeah. Thank you.
okay. Thank you. So what I was saying is that, even if you look at the Irish history, we don't find a moment where, I mean, the name of the beers could change on the label, and they started to call something extra stout or a foreign extra stout, foreign export stout. But you don't really have a moment when, the Irish stout was different from the porters from London. You don't have that, and we don't know. I couldn't find any, even in the Martin Conrad books, I couldn't find any really great difference in the recipes. So you can have the thing about the roasted barley that maybe they started using after the 1880, and I don't know. I mean, they say that they use it still now, but the recipe from Guinness are secret, so we don't really know what they are doing. There are some insights and interviews, but we don't know the recipe for Guinness. It's not public, and
I,
it's
I,
kind of
I,
secret.
I beg to differ.
You know the recipe.
Well, I know the recipe for the Australian brewed stout from 1964,
Mhm.
and it's a fairly straightforward recipe. So I doubt whether they've changed too much, other than make it a high gravity beer and water it down. But you know, so but the evidence for that is not something you can easily get.
do completely agree, and I'm going to that later. Then that the recipe for the Irish stout is really simple and really straightforward. You can use roasted barley, you can use black malt, but the recipe is really, in my opinion, is really straightforward. It is not that complex. I don't know the recipe of Guinness, but I can take a guess at it. And what I wanted to say is that I couldn't find any exact moment in history when you got a difference between the recipes from porter and stout. It's kind of an evolution, and they kind of overlap. And I think that's what we got today is that we have to be practical, and when you get to judge a beer in a competition, you have to find some boundaries. Because if you look back at history, you couldn't find any strong difference between the two styles. And so what you have to do is that we have to refer to the contemporary interpretation of the styles and to the benchmarks that we have today. So this is my thoughts about that. And what I did was try to understand where we got today and how we can differentiate an Irish stout from a British porter, an English porter today, because I couldn't find any strong difference in history. So, as a first step, I just for fun, I tried to ask AI how porter is different from stout. Maybe you already did that. And I asked to Gemini and to ChatGPT, and as I expected, the results weren't particularly surprising, because at the end of the day, AI repeats what it finds online, and online you find the guidelines. So it's just a reading of the guidelines, and this is exactly what I expect the AI to do. So what Gemini says that, as for flour and grains, he says that, I start to use unmalted roasted barley, and it may be true. I don't know. I likely Guinness do that, but it's not. I mean, what I'm interested in is the difference in flavor, not the ingredients. And I don't know if roasted barley is that different from black patent. It may be, but I don't think it's that different. And Gemini says that English porter uses malted grains like chocolate and brown. Okay, and the difference is flour is that stout has a bitter espresso dark chocolate flavor, and porter is more caramel, nutty, and kind of sweet than stout. This is AI. As for sugars and body, said that stouts are notoriously dry, of course, because they were called dry stouts by the BJCP. Uh, uh, Now they are called Irish stouts, but they were called dry stouts some years ago. And porter are sweeter. And we got this kind of body thing that, stouts are usually creamy and thick, but it is, modeled around Guinness, because Nitro Stout are, of course, creamy and thick because they are served by Nitro, and porters are not usually. And then the color is different, and I do agree with that. That stouts are darker than porters, but not always. But they tend to be darker, and this darkness in color translates in a different, I think, flavor, because the roastiness could get more intense in stouts. ChatGPT says similar things. The roast profile is similar, and it touches on the nitrogen use, because a nitropore is connected to Irish stouts. I don't think that is. I mean, Guinness invented in 1960 the nitrogen pour, and it's connected to Guinness, but it's not. I don't think that we should take it for as the definition of Irish stouts. This kind of velvety body, and it's one kind of Irish stout, but it's not always like that. But the AI gathered information of the internet, they got that Irish stout is often served on nitro. And then we got some different things about alcoholic range is similar, and ChatGPT says the open expression is different because he says that bitterness is more pronounced in Irish Stout, and I do agree with that. But this ChatGPT says that English porter may show a more noticeable earthy or floral English hop character, which doesn't make any sense to me. So what we get from this picture is that they just read the guidelines, and this is where I want to what I want to talk about, because when you don't get a clear difference in styles within the history, you have to read the guidelines, and the guidelines refers to the benchmark, which is Guinness and Porter actually. So I try to make a comparison within the BJCP guidelines, but the Brewers Association guidelines are similar, and we can find some differences that we can use when judging English porter and Irish stout in competitions. They are not, accurate as if we talk about history, but they are the reflection of what we drink today. So if we read the BJCP in terms of bread, biscuit, and toast, you get that this is a scale from low to high. So low, medium high, and high. And from the BJCP, you get that, the English porter has some nutty and biscuit toast, and there is no mention about breadiness or biscuit aromas and flavors in Irish stout. So, I mean, the Irish stout essential in most cases that there is no bready or biscuit or meat toast flavors or aromas. That, reflects in the recipes that are much simpler and are much straightforward in stouts than English porter, in my opinion. What about the roastiness? The roastiness can be about chocolate and coffee, and what we get from the guidelines is that English porter is more chocolatey, and Irish stout is can have some low optional roastiness, but mostly Irish stout are edging on the coffee-like roastiness. So it's kind of a high coffee-like roastiness, more intense, more on the coffee side, and the porters are more on the chocolate side. It's not a clear difference. It's not a clear line, but it's something that can be balanced in different ways. So porter is more chocolatey, and Irish stout is more coffee-like. For the caramel and toffee and nuts undertones, you usually have it in porters. It's not is something optional, but if there is some caramel is something that is in the high hand of the range. And in Irish stout, you don't get this kind of caramel toffee and nutty undertones. You can have it maybe in extra stout or in for an extra stout, but in the base Irish stout, I don't usually get this kind of caramel aromas. And this again translates in a much simpler recipe. And I'm going to talk about that later. As of the bitterness, they can overlap, but usually English porter are less bitter than Irish stout, except from the railway porter from 5 Points, which is really bitter. It doesn't feel like a porter to me. And but actually, usually the Irish stout are more bitter than the porter. As I mean, the BJCP said that, and I tend to agree. Also, for the color, it can overlap, but the porters are usually less dark than the stouts. The B on the left side is brown and black, and Irish stout are usually more colored, more darker than porters, and this reflects in the more high coffee-like roastiness. And for sweet versus dry, this kind of overlap because there could be different interpretations of the styles. Irish stouts tend to be drier, but it's not always the case. They can overlap with porters, and some porter can be kind of mid-dry, mid-high dry, and Irish stouts can be kind of not sweet, but mid-sweet. So this is the maybe the less distinctive traits between the two styles. This is what the guidelines says, and I think that I kind of agree, and I want to hear your thoughts about that. if you have any.
Francesco, maybe my thoughts and opinions have been shaped by BJCP quite dramatically, because if I were to describe my personal difference between the two, it would be very much falling along these lines.
Because, I think that when you set at a competition table, you have to have something to rely on. And I mean, I'm not going to drink a porter in a pub and, have a talk about the difference between porter and stouts. But when I said to a competition, I got an Irish stout, I have to make some differences between the two. And I think that this makes sense, at least, for from a contemporary point of view, because if you think about Guinness and if you think about standard porters, they kind of they are different. So I think that these traits kind of sum up the differences quite well to me.
That's right.
But if you,
However, if we're outside of that judging, and even if we take Beamish as a very good example, well, Beamish doesn't fit into either of these. It's
yeah,
somewhat in between. It's
in
even
between.
lighter in color than your more traditional Irish stouts. And also, if you're looking at the craft scene at the moment, even take London, you will get all sorts called a stout. When actually you would argue that's a porter. And I think there is, at least from a London crowd perspective, I'd say that most people see porter as something old man drink and stout as something trendy. So breweries these days don't like calling their porters porters. They would just call it a session stout.
Yeah, because it just they want to sell the beer. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's trendy. Yeah, I understand that. And as a final, remark, we can say that you can put anything on the label. And I was talking about the Railway Porter from 5 Points. It is a really bitter beer, and I don't think it's the classical porter that you drink. Um Reading the guidelines, and it's not a classic example, but they call it. I mean, it's a flagship beer from 5 Points, and you get it as a porter. But if I tried that beer in a contest, I think that I would be skewed towards the Irish stout side and not the porter side.
So, what would you say that the the English porter is a made-up style? It doesn't actually exist, which I think you proved from the discussion previously. It's a style made up primarily by US homebrewers that is now used for judging purposes. And apart from that, it's not particularly useful. What would you say to that?
You mean Irish stout or English porter?
The porter in particular.
Okay. What I get from the history is that the porter was a style that evolved from history, and it got through different recipes. And the porter that drink today is much different from the porter that were brewed in the, I don't know, 1750s or later. And I don't think I mean, it makes historical sense, and it has a really clear evolution. It was different, it changed over time, but it had specific character in some specific period of time. Irish
But what
Stout
what
was,
what 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 I'm saying is that
yeah,
the Americans have made up based on um, whatever the English porter category for judging purposes. As
okay, and
yeah, as a style that you would go and brew, only home brewers would brew to that style. It's not actually a commercial thing because I think, as you've described, everything is in the mix. But you do need something to differentiate to judge it
yeah.
by. So it's a made up thing. It's not really a thing anymore because porter died out in the UK. I don't know, 1970s at the best.
I understood what you said, and you're right. It's a different thing today. And what I found really annoying is that in the latest guidelines, they just wiped out the robust porter and they associated it with the American porter, which is really annoying to me. I'm not there from UK, but it was really, I think, I didn't understand that, and but if you made the guideline just for judging, I agree with you. It's something that is made by modern tasters and is completely different from what we had in the 17th and 1700. It was completely a different thing, and the porter just died out until it was restored by the craft beer movement in UK, and it's something that is modern and it's different. And I think that both these styles, Irish Stout and English Porter, that we know today as are really different from what they were in history. But if you
I
sit
think
down,
one of the interesting points here about the separation of the two for judging purposes is the irony of the fact that they all end up getting lumped together into one flight anyway when we judge them.
yeah, because they are dark beers, so session on
Yeah.
board dark beers, yeah.
Yeah, it's always stouts
Unless you've got a
porters.
competition so large that you have to
Yeah.
have separate flights for porters and for stouts, which never happens. It's like, porters and stouts in that flight, right? Okay, off you go. Yeah.
Enough stouts, maybe.
Frank, sorry to interrupt, and sorry for being late. And hi, everybody. What do you think? I have a little gripe with the BJCP about the classification of Irish stouts, particularly, and having had the benefit of a very extensive tour of Ireland with the IBD and what have you. I think just for starters, they hit the ABV top end at 5%. I've yet to find an authentic. We're talking about Beamish, Murphy's, Guinness, the rest of it. They're all around the 4.2. There's tax reasons. There's all sorts of reasons for that, and I just think 5% is not typical of this style. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not. I mean, they're much lower than that, and I don't know. The classification goes from Irish Stout, Extra Stout, and Foreign Extra Stout, and they make sense. I mean, the Foreign Extra Stout makes sense from an historical point of view.
That's a different beer.
Yeah,
the others
but it is closer to an Imperial Stout. I mean, the Ultimate Stout is the Samuel Smith Imperial Stout is closer to a Foreign Extra Stout, and but the difference between Extra Stout and Irish Stout, I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, I think Guinness. Sorry, I'm really sorry. I missed it all earlier. But as I understand it, Guinness make a pale ale at 7.5 or something, which is then diluted, and then they add all over the world, mainly in Africa, which is their biggest market. They add in the extra roasty stuff. And the malt is locally sourced, and that's the main difference with Guinness and all the rest. And one's just a different version, a different strength version of the other. Whereas Foreign Extra Stout has a different process with the lactic and all the rest of it. But between, so I just think 5% isn't typical of the real world.
No, it isn't. No, yeah, I do agree with you. I don't think we had a testing a blind testing in Italy some weeks ago, and it was interesting because it wasn't about stout, but we got 8 different beers, and we have to guess the style. We have 8 beers and a list of 30 styles, and we have to match the style. But the funny thing was that everybody in the room, we were 20 people, and we had difficulties to understand if a beer was 6 ABV or 5 ABV. I mean, in that range, it's really difficult to tell the difference. If you know the ABV, you are going to feel that. But if you are blind testing, you get the difference between 7 and 4, of course. But between very close ABV, I don't think that it makes that much difference. If you blind test 4.4 ABV stout and a 5 ABV stout, I'm not sure that you are going to really get the difference in ABV. So I agree with you that if you read the label, it's wrong. But I don't think that it's that you can get. I mean, not you, but me and everybody that can get the difference between these small changes in ABV. And sometimes I work with a brewery in Italy that you have an allowance when you declare the ABV on the bottle. If it's 9 ABV, it could be 10, it could be 8, and it's okay with the law. you're abiding the law, and you don't get the difference. So I think that's the classic Irish stout is not 5% ABV, but I think that if you blind test 4% ABV stout and a 5.5% ABV stout, I'm not sure that I would taste the difference.
Thank you.
So to sum up, I think that, we have to have some guidelines to judge in competition. But what I do when I judge, I never write down, this is not an Irish stout because it's too sweet or because it's not too dark. I mean, it could happen if it is really sweet and really low in color. I can, write down in the score sheet that it could be more roasty and and darker and more bitter. But I mean, I'm evaluating the beer if it is good, if it's balanced. And my idea of Irish stout today is that they're kind of more bitter than porters in general. But if you try a beer on the market, you can get really confused because a brewer says that it's a porter on the label and it tastes like a stout and vice versa. So it's really difficult to get the difference. I have no answer. I try to understand the history, and I didn't find any clear definition of stout in history because it meant different things in different period of times. And as for the guidelines, they make a difference, but as we were saying before, they're just for competitions, and I don't think that there is that kind of a difference between the styles. But when I brew my stout, and I got to I got to this later. When I brew my stout, which is this, by the way, and I call it Reut because when I was in Ireland, they have this kind of. It looks like a Cockney pronunciation, but also in Cork they kind of have this closed Reut. And for me, the recipes are different. And when I try to differentiate my brews between porter and stouts, I try to use different ingredients. And the main difference between the two are I mean, a porter is more layered, and I use more amber malt, crystal malts, and some intermediate toasted malts to get more complexity and to get to that, close to that BJCP description. I mean, that's what I do, and that's what in my mind, is the main difference between the styles. In the Irish stout on the left, I use just I used to use just roasted barley, but I get the impression that it was too kind of one-dimensional, so I didn't like it. So I added some chocolate malt, but I didn't use any crystal malts. And I used a lot of flaked barley, 30%, which is what Guinness is supposedly doing. And I'm not sure that is true, but I tried to use less flaked barley and I didn't get any contribution. And I think that when you get to that point when you can feel the unmalted barley, because flaked is unmalted actually, and you can feel I don't know if you feel the proteins. I don't know, maybe
Yeah,
not.
I'd say I mean, I've brewed a few stouts and porters, and yeah, flaked barley definitely makes a difference to the mouthfeel. It makes a huge difference. It really like smooths out, gives a kind of like creamy, slightly fluffiness, and particularly if you don't want to serve your Irish stout on nitro, I think having a high proportion of flaked barley goes some way to achieving that supposed mouthfeel. Whereas flake barley is not something that you want to put in English porter if we want to make that
Really
argument.
agree. What I found is that if you add just a small percentage of flaked barley, like 5%, it doesn't make any difference in my opinion. And I try to increase the percentage every time I brewed a different stout. And when I got to 30%, I kind of thought that I could feel the difference. And it kind of balances the roastiness, which is kind of more pronounced than a porter. And a main difference also is the color and the IBU. I mean, my system, if you see 0.9 BU or G ratio is, it could seem high, but in my system, I don't get a lot of extraction with the boy. So I think that I get, with time, I tend to, increase the bitterness. And I found the balance between quite high IBU, flaked barley, and 10% roasted malts. At the beginning, it was just roasted barley, but I didn't like it. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it was kind of monodimensional. So I divided it in roasted barley and chocolate. And I think that, as we were saying before with Peter, the Aristot recipe is quite straightforward. And I think that from what I gathered, I mean, the recipe of Guinness is not disclosed, but I think that this is kind of um, the main recipe is really, really, really simple. And I think that
I'd just like to comment that, interested in your comment of using a mix of roasted barley and chocolate malt. I've brewed a lot of stouts, and I go 50-50 of black patent malt and roasted barley, because again I find that that's a nicer mix, and I use slightly less flake barley but up in the same ballpark, and that looks to me like a very solid recipe.
Thank you, and that I completely agree with you. And this was developed in years of trial and errors. And I think that this is a classical recipe of Aristot. And if you taste this one, you can tell the difference between this and English porter brewed with amber and crystal malts. And I think that I can take apart these two recipes just by testing it, because if you use crystal mats you are going to feel it in the finished beer, and they're not bad. I mean, I like them, but I don't think that they're typical of the Irish stout as we know the Irish stout today. So I don't know if in the past Guinness used the crystal malts, or if the difference was roasted barley, as Peter said it wasn't used maybe until the 1900s. I don't know, uh, but I think that's for today's standards, these two recipes. I mean, you can have a lot of different recipes for porter. You don't have a lot of different recipes for stout. And when I, am at the end of the brewing season and I have a lot of leftover malts, what I do, I brew a porter because I put a lot of different malts in the porter and it's going to taste okay. I mean, when you get the right balance with the residual sugars and the bitterness, if you throw in 10 different crystal malts, it's going to be, I mean, it's difficult to get balanced, but 10, maybe not 10, but 2, 3, or 4 different crystal malts, you're going to get a good porter. But I don't put different things in my Irish stouts. Maybe if I do an extra stout, I can throw in some brown malt, maybe, because the more alcohol you get, the more the ABV, and the more you expect some complexity in some ways. I tried to brew kind of an imperial stout, just scaling up the recipe from an Irish stout, and it wasn't good. I didn't like it.
Francesco, just wanted to touch on an earlier point you guys spoke about around flake barley. So that's quite a high percentage, right? And so the way you guys described it is it gives you a much a smoother, bigger mouthfeel, etc. Why would you use flaked barley versus flaked oats, for example? And why are oats not appropriate in Irish stout when that's the ingredient that seemingly gives you exactly the same things?
I think that, I mean, they're different because they're different cereals, and oats, they tend to have more oils, and they tend to have, I don't know if they have more beta glucans, maybe not, maybe you're right, they're similar. And I don't think, I mean, I'm really, when I talk about the recipe design, I always talk about using really small percentages of oats or reflected barley to give body and to help the form. I don't think that small percentage make a huge difference. You have to use a lot of that, and I think that if you use a lot of oats, you can run into problems with the oils that can, make problems with the foam, which, kind of decrease the foam stability. But I don't think that if you use oats instead of flaked barley, you can taste the difference, because oats, they don't have that huge flavor. And when I was in London in 2019, I analyzed the ingredients from the oatmeal porter from Samuel Smith's, which is the flagship, I mean, the benchmark of the style. And if you run the recipe in a brewing software, the ingredients are listed in the order of weight. And if you make some calculation, the odds in that stout, they are not more than 5 or 4%.
Yeah, which is very common for oatmeal stout specifically. But I was just more focusing on the mouth, because obviously if we completely step away from the stout and porter conversation and talk about NEPAs, well, yeah, you put 30% flaked oats, right? But similarly from discussion here, the flaked barley gives you a better mouthfeel, a better foam stability, which is probably something you would appreciate in that style as well. But somehow the oats are used there. Perhaps due to their haze contribution. And I don't know if flaked barley gives you the same haze contribution as the oats do.
Yeah, they surely have different proteins. And, it's not the quantity of the proteins, but it's the quality of the proteins. And wheat have different proteins from barley, and barley has different proteins from oats. And I think that also the amount of beta glucans is different between oats and barley. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not that technical, but I think that they're different cereals and they give different contribution. And you could use also unmalted wheat, but wheat has a different flavor from barley, and it's kind of lighter. And so maybe you are losing something with wheat, but I don't think that's. I'm not sure that you could taste the difference. So you're right. I don't know.
Thank
Could I
you.
ask,
Cool.
please? Sorry, what's the batch size for these?
This 10 liters, 10 or 11, I think. Yeah.
Sorry?
10 liters. Yeah.
All right.
It's really small. Have a kind of 70% efficiency.
Frank, have you sorry again, if you've covered all this already, but the Dudden Park recipes, I've tried a few of those, and I think the Colonel have pulled a few. I've tried the Imperial Brown Stouts and some, and compared them to the Colonel, and they're not that far off. We even obviously had a lucky day, but it doesn't always work out that way. But interestingly enough, well, obviously, what was available in terms of technology and ingredients at the time, and a lot of brown malts, which I personally like a lot.
Yeah, really do.
And it packs a punch, I have to say. But those are the stouts, historical stout recipes I've been using as source material, and the Barclay Perkins stuff and so on and so on. That have any thoughts on all that? Sorry if you've gone over that already, but
No, I think that historical recipes are really interesting, and especially from Barclay Perkins. But the problem, Ron Pattinson's published a lot of recipes from Barclay Perkins. The problem is that if you judge them by contemporary guidelines, I think that they're kind of style. But it doesn't mean that they're not good recipes.
No, just from a brewing point of view. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I really love brown malt, and when I brew my extra stout, I always put brown malt in there. I use a lot of brown malt in the in porters, and I think that the Kerner uses brown malt a lot. And you can get a lot of great brews with different ingredients. But if you're going to judge Irish stout with a benchmark, you have. I think that
that was more on the English side, rather than
Okay. And I love brown malt, and I think that it makes sense, and it is a great ingredient. I also like amber malt and crystal malts. The problem with when you're using a lot of specialty malts, you have to get the balance right. And the problem with that is that, crystal malts, roasted malts, they have a lot of sugars that are going to end up in the final gravity. Because I think all the roasted malts, all the sugars are denatured, so they are not fermentable, and they're all going to the final gravity. And if you add crystal malts, amber malts, brown malts, you are going to have a lot of dextrins ending up in the finished beers. It's not bad per se, but
Tastes
you have
nice.
to, yeah, but you have to balance it with the right bitterness, and it is good because they can give body to the beer, and they give a lot of nuances and different layers of flavors, but you have to get the balance right. It's not easy, and it takes time to get to the right balance. Also because you can use different yeasts, for example, and using crystal malts, a lot of crystal brown and amber malts makes it more difficult to get the right balance. That's my opinion, but you can get there, and if you get there, it can give you a really complex, multi-layered, and nuanced beer. Could be
I
really,
slept
really,
like a
really
log,
good.
I have to say.
Yeah. And that's like the kernel beers. They're always like that. I love the kernel stack beers because they're really, really complex. And I can remember drinking their Irish stouts. Maybe it's new. I don't know if they make an Irish stout, I think, but I can remember it. But I really loved their interpretation of historical stouts and porter and the brown ales. They're really, really, really good.
Thanks.
That's pretty much that I have to say. It was really an interesting discussion. You can always be sure that you got the right, way to judge a porter and a stout. It's always, something that is going to be discussed. And I mean, I'm open for discussion. I've been judging for some years now. I've been brewing for a lot of years, but I don't have, the solution to this kind of uh, debate. But I think that this evening, we had a really interesting conversation, and we can agree that, as Peter was saying, Irish stout should be kind of, I mean, the basic Irish stout should have a simple recipe, so you can taste the simplicity in the recipe. You can taste the roastiness, the coffee-like edge, and they are usually kind of a bit more bitter than the porters, but this is a definition, from the guidelines and from the contemporary examples. As Peter said before, the porter that the BJCP describes is a modern porter. It's not the porter that was brewed in the in the 1800s. So we just stick to that. And if you want to enter an historical porter in the competition, we have the historical categories. Yesterday, I judged the London Brow Stout historical style, and it was really difficult because I have no idea what this is. And I just read the guidelines, and it's really weird because it's something that you don't drink anymore. I don't know who makes a London Brow Stout like the guidelines. You it. Okay.
Well, not the guidelines, but just historical.
Okay. Okay. Send it over so I can test it.
Oh, yeah.
I quite often brew historical stouts, and I put them into the competition so that I get. I'll pick a category that I think's about right, and then I look forward to getting some, hopefully, informed feedback from the judges, which is good to get a point of view. I did an 1835 Whitbread Porter. I had to tint it with caramel because it was too brown, because it used a lot of modern brown malt. I tinted it up and I came second, so I was quite stoked with that.
In what category did you put the beer?
I think I put it into extra stout, Irish extra stout, because it was a decent gravity, but it wasn't black as black. I needed to put the caramel in to get it nice and dark.
You get to the right black color at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you can enter with a few adjustments into the guideline.
I think that if you enter in the extra stout and foreign export stout, you kind of have a more of allowance, to get some balance, different balance, and some different malt character. Maybe if you put the beer in the Irish stout category, maybe it wasn't,
Yeah, it's a bit
really.
limited. It's a bit limited.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I do agree with that. Yeah.
yeah. The extra stout you can definitely you can put a bit of amber or crystal in. That's always good.
What I do with my
Interesting
extra stout.
article. So I read an article by it was an interview with the head brewer from O'Hara's.
Oh, Laras, yeah.
In Ireland, and
They brew a really wonderful Irish stout. It is one of my favorites. Yeah.
yeah, their extra stout, like the Lane Falan, is just like
Islam, yeah, yes,
unbelievable. But my point was going to be about that actually, and the brewer saying that actually for the extra stout they reduce the amount of roasted barley in it so that it sort of doesn't have any sort of harshness. It's like less like more chocolate malt, less roasted barley, and then that sort of more chocolatey flavors sort of go through it. So it's not all about like extra stout amping everything up. It's like a slight
no.
change of
It's a different drink
Yeah.
completely, isn't it?
Yeah.
I completely agree. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So just pouring. There you go. I can't do this. 1832 brown stout. There you go. Cheers.
Yes. I'm drinking my extra stout.
I'm drinking Budvar.
That's
I'm
much more sensible. Actually, that's really nice.
1% wood aged one then.
Mm. Ooh.
Frank, what was the thing you were going to do about head color? I saw there's a brief flash.
Okay, that is. You want to see that? It's. I think it's something that could be interesting.
Nice.
Where is it? Oh, okay, this one. That's when you drink Guinness and when you see pictures of Guinness, you always said, you always got that, the head of Guinness is really, really
Francesco,
white.
really sorry. You're not sharing at the moment. Or at least it's
Sorry.
not on my screen.
Okay, I tried to do that again. I'll share. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
We can see it.
So, I mean, so many times I've been asked, the same question is from homebrewers is how can I achieve a creamy white head just like Guinness? And and my I was brewing at the time and I'm brewing now and I don't have a nitrogen tap, so and I tried a lot of Guinness. My answer was, are you sure that the head of Guinness is really white? Because to me it isn't. And first thing is that you have the marketing from Guinness where you got this kind of high contrast pictures of black beer against a white foam, and if you see the beer from a marketing picture, you imagine that the foam is white. But first thing is that when you got this is a gray rectangulars on the right, and they are on against a white screen, and they look kind of dark gray. And if you put some the same rectangular on the black screen, they look lighter. And so if you look at this screen, I think that you see that the rectangular on the left are brighter and lighter in gray than the rectangular on the right. But if you take away the black stripes, you get the same color. So the first thing is that you can see the difference. That the Guinness form is not white. It appears white. It is because, you know, the contrast between the black and the white, and the marketing sells you that, you know, you have these images of, black against white, and it is good marketing. I like the contrast between these two colors, and they have a lot of marketing, things that, like, I don't know, a lot of things that are black against white, and it is really cool. But if you pour a Guinness without nitrogen and from a bottle, the foam color is like this, and it's not white at all. It's light brown. And what gives, colors to the foam? It can be different things, and sometimes I found that, and this, I think that Peter is going to, step out of his chair and leave the room. Roasted barley gives the color of the to the foam, and it is, for the roasted barley against the black pattern, that you have a white foam in Guinness and not a white foam in other beers. And of course, this is, in my opinion, is not true. I mean, roasted barley is different from black pattern because it's barley and not malted barley. But there isn't any reason, because that roasted barley gives a wider form. It makes no sense, and it is not like that. What could make sense is that if you have a nitrogen poor, so the nitro stout, you have kind of the light scatterings, so you have a wider form because the bubbles are smaller. And if you think, as bubbles from the ocean waves, they are white even if the water is transparent. And if you think about soap bubbles, they are transparent because they are bigger. So if you get smaller bubbles, you can get the light that is scattered more, and you can get a wider foam. But I think that the real reason is that you have a different viscosity in the beer. So these are two beers that I think, the Black Butter from the Shoots and the Yeti from Great Divide, and they are, the one of the left is a porter, so I think it's about 6 degrees, 5.5, and the Yeti is about 10 degrees, 10 ABV. And, you can see that the foam on the darker beer is much, much, much darker. This is because, the beer density changes the foam color. Because in higher alcohol beers, the liquid itself is more viscous, is denser, and it kind of clings to the surface of the bubbles. So, how to get a white foam on a dark beer, on an Irish stout? You have to make a light beer, so the classic Irish stout 4.5, and I think that the nitrogen pool can help in that. And if you get a picture, this is the extra stout that I am drinking. And if you put the eye contrast on the image, it kind of gets the foam wider than it actually is, because the foam on this beer is actually light brown. But in this picture, you can, you get the feel that the foam is wider. This beer is not pure nitrogen, but I get around it. I bought a nitrogen faucet, and I bought the adapter from Kegland for the new setup, and I carbonated the beer at very low carbonation. It is kind of 1.3 volumes, and I pushed the beer through the nitrogen tap with CO2 at 40 psi, and I got this kind of effect. I have it here, and it kind of simulates the nitrogen pour, and I got really great satisfaction with that, because I didn't use nitrogen, and from what I started, nitrogen is important to get some nitrogen through the tap, and nitrogen is less soluble, is not soluble in beer, so it's going to make a thinner foam. But if you push the beer through this kind of nitrogen tap with a small hole, and the beer has really low carbonation, you can make a huge foam with a flat beer, actually. and it gives the impression of pouring from nitrogen, even if you don't have nitrogen. Of course, you have to disconnect the CO2 tank and restore the beer to 1 or 2 psi, because unless it's going to overcarbonate. But if you do it at home, you can do that. You can do that in a pub. And I got really nice results from this method of pouring. And the foam, you see that here appears white, here is not really white. This is an extra stout, a 5.5 ABV, so it's more denser than the classic Irish stout. And I brew it with brown malt, and I think it's really good.
Brilliant. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that.
Brew it for some products, and we are nearing some products. What time is it? Yeah, 2 hours left.
Wow, there's so much information.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the talk about the stouts, because it's always a matter of discussion. And what I learned, from judging and from brewing and from studying beer is that you are not ever going to be sure about anything. I mean, you can know a lot of things, and I grew a background by studying and by experimenting with beers and by judging. But beers is always going to surprise you, and you should not be sure. I mean, you can learn a lot of things, but it's not always black and white unless it is Guinness, and you have to be open. You have to be open to change your mind and to discuss everything, because that is what makes this kind of world interesting. And talking with you guys was really a really great thing to me. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for putting so much effort into this.
Yeah, it's
Thank
fantastic.
you. That was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Very much.
Cheers. Thank you, Frank.
Yes.
Is Stout and Porter big in Italy now?
Not really, because we have this kind of misconception that dark beer is heavy, and a lot of people that don't drink craft beer, they think that, oh no, I'm not going to drink a Guinness because it's an heavy beer, but it is not. We have a lot of Irish pubs that have Guinness on tap, Guinness and some Murphy's. We don't have Beamish anymore. I mean, I couldn't find that.
That's a political thing, isn't it? It's very complicated, the distribution.
Yeah. No, it's very complicated to get beer from the UK. But no, I think that we have some niche in imperial stouts, but low alcohol dark beers, they are not a huge thing in Italy. I'm sad about that, but it is like it, and this is why I brew them at home.
Yeah. Can you see that changing? I think there's even in France, it's been a big, for all sorts of reasons. Guinness is quite cool now, but I think just the price of hops and all sorts of other reasons and sustainability. There's and the need for something new every year. That there's more interest in these styles, perhaps less hop forwards.
We Italy, I mean, it's not a problem; it's a good thing actually. But we have this thing with Germany, with Bamberg and all the German beers. And in Italy, we have in Rome, we have Emanuele Colonna, which is kind of the main importer of German beers. So usually, German beers is more widespread than Irish beers. I don't know why. I mean, they are both good, and I like them both. But I think that they are cheaper because importing beer from the UK is more expensive.
Okay, islands in Europe, so it's a little bit less complicated for us, but it's a nightmare, to be honest. But I think there's a little bit of a tendency here for commercial reasons, sort of tax reasons, hops being expensive and the rest of it, to jump on the historical bandwagon a bit, marketing reasons, to go back to seeing a little bit more of dark lagers and less hop forward beers, just because it's something different and it's cheaper apart from anything else, and more malt focus perhaps. Do you think that might happen in your place of the world?
Since I started drinking and brewing stouts in Italy, they never went were a big thing. I mean, the Guinness pub were most widespread in the past, and now they are less widespread. But the pubs, the Irish pubs that I used to attend, used to go when I was younger, when I was 20. Now
We're
I'm
all young
50.
still.
They are all there. They didn't close. They are all there. The best pubs, Irish pubs in Rome that I used to go when I was young, they're all there still. So I think that they have some attire to people, but uh, at the moment the thing in Italy is lagers and Czech lagers.
Mm.
The Baladen, the Italian brewery. He just made a Czech lager with Budvar. Budvar is making Czech lager with everyone in Europe, and he made this kind of Czech beer with Italian ingredients, which is kind of, I don't know. I
Oh yeah,
don't
like
agree with that.
Huggy Czech beer,
Yeah. I think that Budvar made Czech beer with British hops with Bridge lately. I think so.
Yeah,
They're
Dean
making,
did something,
yeah,
didn't he? With
yeah. But we don't have, I don't know, a soft spot with lagers, with dark beers, except for Imperial Stout.
Say no more.